Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Hiba Khan and today I'll be letting you guys know more about the picture of Dorian Gray, such as its background, its characters, its themes, its story, its relation with the art for art's sake movement, as well as some lines that Mr. Wilde wrote himself. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you so much for taking your time out to see this. To start with the background of the picture of Dorian Gray, let me tell you a bit about its history. Now, the picture of Dorian Gray was not actually a full-length novel. Instead, it was a 13-chapter novella, and it was published in 1890 in the magazine of Lippincott. Lippincott's magazine, which is an American magazine, and its editor, Mr. J.M. Stoddart, actually dined with Mr. Wilde back in 1889 and commissioned him to work on this novella. Basically, he asked many other writers in London to do the same, and he also asked Mr. Oscar Wilde for this. And Mr. Oscar Wilde actually wrote this story in a span of, I believe, 7 months. 7 months later, he gave him the manuscript for this novella, and that is when it went through rigorous process of editing. Now, why would that happen, you may be wondering. Well, the thing is that I have it here. As you can see, this is the image of Lippincott's magazine where the picture of Dorian Gray was published back in 1890. You can see here the year is written and there's title and the contents of the magazine. I had this cover printed out because I'm just really interested into this story. Anyways, so why it went through editing? The reason was that there were many elements in this story which had some censored stuff. Like, there was stuff which wasn't morally accepted by the society of that time. Therefore, J.M. Stoddart actually edited around 500 words out of the original novella, and these words actually contained content which had elements of homosexuality, indecency, immorality, and it even contained referring to Dorian's lovers as mistresses. So it was quite derogatory for such a thing to be published in mainstream media, which is the reason why J.M. Stoddart actually deleted all of this content. Anyways, this went through editing and everything, and then around in 1891, a year later after the publishing of the novella, Mr. Oscar Wilde himself published a longer version of this novella, and it became a full-length novel. Basically, the 13 chapters went on to become 20 chapters, and that is how it became a novel. Now, it contained various differences. There were a number of differences between the novella and the novel. So yeah, more details were there, and much of the obscene scenes were cut out of them. Also, that it also had the addition of Sybil Wane's brother, Mr. James Wayne. These were the changes which happened in the novel in 1891. Now, if you come fast forward to the year 2011, which is around like a century or a decade later, in 2011, a full, how would I say it, the original version of the novel was published. Basically, the manuscript, which had 500 words deleted out of it by the editor of Lippincott's magazine, those 500 words were published in the mainstream media along with the original manuscript of the novella, and it was titled, as I know, is The Picture of Dorian Gray, an annotated, uncensored edition, and it was published by the Belknap Press. So this version was very much accepted by today's society because, as you know, society is progressing. Many people in the Western media are more accepting to things which were obscene or unacceptable back in the Victorian era. So this is how the background of the picture of Dorian Gray is wrapped up. Okay, so now I'll be introducing the characters of this story. Basically, I'll be letting you know about the main characters as well as the major side characters, but let me just introduce you to them. I also had this printout of the three main characters, which I have with me over here, and I'm gonna show you them. Okay, so basically this image is from the 2009 movie of The Picture of Dorian Gray, where Ben Barnes starred as Dorian. And as you can see over here, this is Mr. Henry Wotton, and this is Basil Hallward. All these three characters are central to this story and have significant role within the story. Now, the story mainly evolves around Dorian, but these two characters are the ones who have major influences on him. Basically, all these three have influences upon each other. Now, as we talk about it, Dorian is a person who is very beautiful. His character is very beautiful, and he is obsessed with his beauty. And his friend, Mr. Henry Wotton, is the one who praises him a lot about his beauty. He's the one who influences him to do many things, whether it be good or bad. But I'll let you know about it when I tell you about his story. Anyways, and this is Mr. Basil Hallward. He's an artist by profession, but he admires Dorian to great extent. Since Dorian is the embodiment of beauty, and artists are attracted towards beauty. So it was inevitable that Basil would be infatuated with the beauty of Dorian and would, to some extent, be obsessed with it. Now, I don't have the image of the fourth character, which is Miss Sybil Vane, but she's also very important to this story. Basically, Sybil Vane was the the short-lived fiancée of Dorian Gray, and the reason why I say short-lived will be explained when I explain the story. Now I'll be explaining the story of The Picture of Dorian Gray. So I believe it would be nicer if I just used the poster so as you could relate to it, be imaginative about it, because it has made me with my own imagination. Anyways, now Dorian is a person who got orphaned at his early age, and due to some relative passing away, he inherited a lot of money at the time that he became a 20-year-old boy. So when you think about it, what happens when a very young person inherits a lot of money at a young age? The answer is obvious: he becomes corrupted. So that is what happened with Dorian. A boy of 20-year-old age is very naive, is able to be influenced easily by other people, and that is exactly what happened with him. So Lord Henry Wotton is the person who influences Dorian a lot, and Basil is the person who also influences Dorian to some extent, but not as much. Okay, so basically, Basil painted a portrait of Dorian because he was a really beautiful person, and through Basil did he meet Lord Henry Wotton. And as they met with each other, the thing that happened was that Dorian was a person who was easily influenced by other people and their philosophies. Lord Henry Wotton was a very hedonistic person. He had strong opinions, he had philosophies, he used to talk a lot. Like men in Middle Ages too, he did the very same. He had strong views, but whatever he said, it wasn't something that he actually acted upon. It was something that he aspired to be. Alright, so that was the case with Lord Henry Wotton. Anyways, so basically when Lord Henry Wotton basically said to Dorian, like, you're really beautiful and stuff like that, like, why isn't he as much proud about it, or why does he take it for granted? And that is when Dorian began to think that my beauty will fade, so what must I do with it? Like, it is something that he treasures a lot. So since Basil Hallward actually painted his portrait and it remained really pretty and had captured his beauty in that age, so one day Dorian said that he wishes that his portrait ages instead of himself. And that is when he made a deal with fate. I don't know who exactly it was he made the deal with, but it definitely wasn't an angel. So he made the deal, and that is what happened. His portrait aged instead of him. And not only age, like whatever thing he did, whatever good or bad thing he did, all of its effects were reflected onto the portrait of Dorian. So Dorian went on, met Sybil Vane, who was a theatrical actress who used to act in Shakespeare's plays as Ophelia in Hamlet, as we can say. Dorian at first was sincerely in love with her, but when he made Basil and Lord Henry meet her through taking them to a theatrical performance of her, they kind of disapproved of her. She was quite nervous, and that is when Dorian heard what his friends had to say. They said that maybe Dorian's infatuated with her because of her beauty and not because of her talent. And that is when Dorian realized that he wants her for her talent, and her talent is her beauty, and that is what he loves. And since she does not have that talent anymore, like she performed badly, so he breaks off his engagement with her. Now that is what happens, and this is what leads Sybil on to take her own life. Dorian went to make amends, but he was too late. Alright, and that is when Dorian realized that his only goal in life is to indulge in all the bad things that life has to offer, like all the immoral acts, a libertine culture that he has to obtain. Like there were a lot of things that were influencing him, and Lord Henry Wotton was one of the people who influenced him to do bad things. Now, when we talk about it, there is a time skip of 18 years. Now, those 18 years, the portrait, as I said already, all the effects of Dorian's doings were reflected onto the portrait, whereas Dorian remained as young as he was the day that he made the deal. Now, there wasn't a scratch on his face, there wasn't a wrinkle on any part of his body. He was absolutely beautiful. So this went on, and Dorian did all that he could. He did not get married, but he engaged in all sorts of immoral acts. He used to sleep around a lot. He used to go into brothels. He used to get drunk a lot. There were a lot of wrongdoings at his hand. When we talk about murders, he also committed that, whether they be direct or indirect. Now, one of the murders that he committed was of Sybil, which was indirect because his doings influenced Sybil to take her own life. Secondly, there was the murder of Basil Hallward. Now, Basil Hallward one day confronted Dorian about his culture or his lifestyle, which was totally influenced by the libertine culture. So Dorian, in a fit of anger, he murdered Basil with a dagger or a short knife, if I can say that. So he murdered Basil, and in order to dispose of his body, he contacted a scientist friend of his. His name was Alan Campbell. Now, Alan was not really wanting to help him, but Dorian actually blackmailed him. Now, out of blackmailing, Alan helped him and helped him dispose of Basil's body. Afterwards, Alan was so much in guilt that he took his own life. So you can see that there was the murder of Sybil, there was the murder of Basil, and then there was the murder of Alan. Afterwards, there was also a fourth murder, which was of James Vane. Now, who must James Vane be, you must be wondering. James Vane was the brother of Sybil Vane, who actually died in his quest for taking revenge of his sister with Dorian. He wanted to take revenge on Dorian for making his sister take her own life. So this was the thing that happened with it, and that's how those murders were committed. Now, after James Vane died, Dorian realized that he wants to lead a righteous life, but there's a catch. Now, the thing is that he does not actually want to live a righteous life, but the thing is, he wants to remove all the ugly things from his existence that surround him because he was so much obsessed with beauty. Now, when he says to Lord Henry Wotton that he wants to lead a righteous life, right after that moment, he went on to his attic and took out his portrait, which was locked away for 18 years. When he looked at that portrait, he saw that that portrait became even more uglier, and there was no change made to it. And that is the moment that Dorian realized that there was no point in him wanting to be righteous when his actual goal was to actually pursue a higher level of libertine culture and indulge into all his desires. and there was no way out for him. And like the only way that he could actually maybe get better or uh, get get ultimate beauty or something was through the act of forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is something that you ask yourself from the God, right? But there was an evidence for his wrongdoings. And what was that evidence? You might be wondering. Well, it was nothing but this very portrait over here. Now, this portrait, which was locked away in his attic, he went on in a fit of rage, and he was like, you know what, maybe I should just destroy this. This is the only evidence I have of my wrongdoings. Maybe I should just destroy it. And that is exactly what he did. He went on, ironically, he took the same knife that he murdered Basil Hallward with, and he stabbed the portrait. Now, what he didn't realize by doing so was that if he caused harm to the picture, the effects would eventually be upon his own body. Now, that is where he made the mistake. And as he did it, he left out a screech of pain, and all of the servants in his house came rushing towards his room above. Now, when they came, they saw a really ugly man lying on the floor, and they also found his portrait. But surprisingly, the portrait was fine. The portrait wasn't ugly at all. It turns out that the moment that Dorian harmed the painting, all the elements of that painting were transformed onto Dorian's body, and Dorian's youthful beauty was transformed back to the painting. The only reason why his servants actually recognized that Dorian was the person who was lying on the floor was because of his finger. There was a finger that he was, because of his ring actually. There was a ring that he was wearing that time which belonged to Dorian only, and that is the only reason why his servants recognized who the man on the floor was. Now I'll be discussing the themes of the story of the picture of Dorian Gray. Now, there were a number of themes depicted throughout the course of story, and you may have already guessed what kind of themes there were, as I already told you the story. Now, to actually name them, there were the themes of hedonism, okay, to indulge in the acts of pleasure. Then there was the theme of libertine culture. Dorian, throughout the novel, engaged in these acts, and there was no remorse that he felt while doing so. Third, there was the obsession with beauty. Now, there was obsession with beauty on Basil Hallward's part, on Dorian's part, as well as Henry Wotton's part. All of these men were obsessed with beauty, and there was no end to it. Even in the passages that you can see in the picture of Dorian Gray, every other line is just a praise for beauty or a remark for it. They were obsessed with it. Now, as I lead on, it is, the fourth theme is the influence. Now, who you sit around with, whoever your friend is, they have a huge impact on you. And same happened with Dorian. He had friends, and they had a bad influence on him, even if his friends did not commit the same crime themselves. So it matters a lot who you are around and who you're not. Fourth, there's societal hypocrisy. Now, there's this line where Dorian sort of says that he committed the sins which Lord Henry Wotton did not have the courage to commit. He said something like that, and it really is intriguing to me whatever he said, because it is quite ironic that Lord Henry Wotton was judging Dorian for the things that he himself had said to him throughout the years, and he is surprised now that Dorian has acted upon them. So yeah, there's societal hypocrisy on Lord Henry Wotton's part. Now, fourth, there's is the obliviousness of the effect that one has on another. Now, oftentimes we don't know what kind of effects we have on other people, such as our friends or our family, but it matters a lot the kind of a person you are and what kind of things that you do and what kind of effect you have on other people, because their actions actually define the kind of influence you have over them. And Lord Henry Wotton was absolutely oblivious of the effect that he was having on Dorian. He thought that he was just being a cool guy who had a lot of things to say and who was a philosopher sort of person, but the thing was that Lord Henry Wotton wasn't any good. he was absolutely oblivious of the fact what he was doing to Dorian, and that is what led to his downfall. Lastly, I would say that the theme of desire. Now, desires know no end. Even with the 18 years that had passed in Dorian's life, he did not actually get the full taste of the desires that he wanted, or the things that he desired. He wanted to even delve even further into the libertine culture, and that is what led him to destroy his painting and to his death ultimately. With this video ending over here, I would like to just end it with something important. Now, this novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, is written by Mr. Oscar Wilde, and he was the person who was a part of the movement called the Art for Art's Sake movement. Now, this movement actually says that they want to create art for the sake of art and not for teaching society anything. Like, it wasn't for didactic purposes, it wasn't for moralistic purposes, it was only for the sake of itself. And it was in competition with the Art for Life's movement, Art for Life's Sake, as I can be more specific about it. So the thing is that even though Mr. Oscar Wilde did not write it with the intention to teach society something, but actually leave it to the minds of the readers what is right and what is not. But I believe that it's really important to recognize that this story actually reflects what a person is supposed to do and what a person is not supposed to do. I think this novel teaches a lot to us. For instance, how Dorian was and how he changed into this certain other person just because of the influences he had in life. All of these elements of the story teaches a number of things, and I think that it does teach us how to be moral by learning how another immoral person is. Like, when we see something bad, we know that we don't want to be like that, and that is how we know that maybe we should keep our morality, be more nice and be more moralistic, have a righteous lifestyle. And I believe that is what Oscar Wilde taught his audience, whether it was intentional or non-intentional. There were very famous lines which Oscar Wilde wrote. I think it was in 1984. Sorry, 1894, yes. In 1894, Oscar Wilde wrote a letter, and it had some very strong lines, and I would just like to share it with you. Now, it reads as, "The picture of Dorian Gray contains much of me in it. Basil Hallward is what I think I am." Oscar Wilde. "Lord Henry is what the world thinks of me." Like, Lord Henry is the person that what the world considers for Wilde to be. And Dorian, the character of Dorian Gray, is what Mr. Wilde aspires to be. It is important to note that Mr. Wilde himself was a homosexual, right? And to see him actually connect with the character of Dorian and to write a letter and to actually confess that he wants to be like Dorian at some point of life actually tells us how it was somehow an autobiographical novel of his. We know that he belonged to a very rich culture, had quite a big lifestyle, but had a very tragic end to life, and the same was with Dorian, we can say. This was the sole novel of Mr. Oscar Wilde, and it is quite obvious that it is a masterpiece. I don't have to say about it more, it speaks quite for itself. And I would also like to show this another book I have. Like, there are different covers that I have. Both of them were gifted to me by my friends. One is this and another is this. It's a Collins Classic Edition. So I admire both of these, and yeah, these both these basically this book means a lot to me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much.